Hey everyone, today we've got the first in what is going to be an occasional series of tutorials called Easy But Epic Piano Pieces. As the name suggests, in each tutorial I'm going to teach you how to play a piano piece I've written that is designed to sound pretty cool and to look pretty cool when you play it, but which isn't actually too difficult to play. That's not to say that these pieces won't challenge you. They should bend and stretch your brain a bit and help you to improve your overall skills on the piano. But none of them will have anything massively demanding in them. So if you're around grade 2 or grade 3 standard on the piano, or if you've completed my beginner's piano course here on YouTube and you're looking for more material to work on, these pieces should suit you just fine. The piece we're going to work on today is called Hambleton Mosses, and I'll play it in a second with the score on screen. You can also download the score yourself as a PDF, and to do that just look for the links in the description text that accompany this video, or visit billspianopages.com/Hambleton and you'll find them there as well. Now, some of the stuff in the score looks crazy difficult. We've got these weird additive time signatures and things like that, but actually it's nowhere near as difficult to play as it looks. I'll play it through once without the marked repeat, and then we'll go through it in detail. And if you want to see what my hands are actually doing on the piano keyboard, you'll be able to do that a little bit later, because I'll play through the whole thing again towards the end of the tutorial without the score on screen. Okay, here we go. So now let's spend a little bit of time taking the piece to bits and looking at how you can play it for yourself. There are 4 things that I want you to notice right away. First of all, almost the whole piece is based on broken chord shapes. We're taking pretty simple chords and breaking them up into their constituent notes to create the music, okay? The only real exception to that is when we're playing these little tiny fragmentary bits of melody with the left hand over the right, when we're doing things like this. Otherwise, it's almost all broken chords. Number 2, the piece is divided into 3 unequal sections. There's the introduction, 5 bars long, which is almost entirely a broken E flat chord with a single added A flat and a little bit of rhythmic variation that we'll talk about shortly. And then there's the main section, which is a little bit slower and which you can repeat if you like to make the piece longer, though as I say, when I played through then I didn't. Then there's this final section at the end, which again is just made up of broken chords, okay, and that is quicker than any of the sections that preceded it, although not loads quicker. Third thing to notice, there's a lot of hand over hand work. Okay, the left hand is forever going over the right, and very often as well the right hand is coming under the left. Now, hand over hand is something that looks flashy and looks difficult, but it isn't difficult at all really. You just have to practice a little bit, and it's actually a really useful skill to have. One of the main aims of this piece is to help you get more confident with hand over hand work, a really useful piano skill. Number 4, the fourth thing I want you to mention is that you get a lot of freedom when it comes to expressions and dynamics and fingering. I even say right at the start that all the dynamics are ad lib, so you can basically do what you want with the louds and the softs. Rhythmically too, make what you like of this freely marking at the top of the piece. The one thing that is absolutely for sure in this piece is that making a good job of it depends on using a lot of expression. So use that freedom to put plenty of expression in. Yeah, play it loud, play it soft, do what you like, but just don't play it kind of emotionally dead. Yeah, put the feeling into this piece because that's what it really demands. Okay, so now let's dive into some of these individual sections, break them down and look at some of the challenges that you're going to face. So let's have a think about this hand over hand business first. As I said, it's not as tricky as it looks, and it's a useful technique to be familiar with. Now, the first time it crops up is in the very first bar, where we have this hand over hand broken chord. Now, the main thing with hand over hand is to get yourself in position quickly. You don't need to worry about sustaining the notes here because the sustain pedal is doing that for you. As the direction at the top says, you're holding the sustain pedal down throughout the entire piece, unless your piano is a bit cranky or a little bit out of tune, in which case you might need to lift it very occasionally just to clear some mushy sounds, but mostly we're just holding the sustain pedal down, so we don't need to worry about that. What we can focus on is just playing the notes smoothly and effectively. So we start off with these 3 notes in the left hand, followed by 3 notes in the right, 3 notes in the left, and 3 in the right. Yeah. So what you're doing with your hands there is you play the first lot of left hand notes, then as you're playing the right hand notes, move the left straight over into position, play its notes, and as you're doing that, move the right hand under, ready for its final lot of 3 notes for that bar. Let me do that again slowly. So left over, right under. Okay, we're aiming never to get caught out. Yeah, the same goes for the main section. So let's have a look at bar 6. We don't have to worry about sustain yet, so as soon as the left has done its stuff down here, we can get it over the right and ready to play. It doesn't matter if it's hanging around a little while waiting to come in. The important thing is to be in position and don't get caught out. So apart from that, hand over hand is pretty easy. You just need to get used to moving your hand in time to be ready to play what's coming next up the keyboard. Yeah, you don't want to get caught out having to play a note up here in the left while your hand's still down here. Yeah, because quick jumps are much more difficult. Before we go further, I just want to mention something that you might be wondering about. Looking at the score, you may have noticed the relative absence of rests. Now, usually in a piece of piano music, if nothing is happening in one of the 2 staves, then the empty space is filled with suitable rests. So, for example, I could have taken this bar and notated it like this. So why haven't I? Why haven't I put those rests in? Basically, it's because the music flows between the 2 staves to such an extent that it makes sense to treat them as one single stave. Now, if this piece were the standard kind of melody in the right, accompaniment in the left kind of piano music, then rests would be useful because they would help us time the 2 hands against each other. But here, rests aren't really useful. They don't give us any additional useful information. So I treat the 2 staves as one big stave and miss out most, but not all, as we'll see, most of the rests in the interest of keeping things as neat and tidy and clear as possible. Missing rests out like this is not an uncommon or unusual thing to do. You do see it in quite a lot of classical piano writing. Now let's have a look at some of these weird time signatures. For example, this one in bar 6 where we've got 12 plus 4 over 8. This is what we call an additive time signature. And additive time signatures aren't that common, although you will come across them, but you're going to find them really useful here because it will help you get a sense of the stress pattern and the kind of rhythmic drive of this particular piece of music. Now, as you may know, time signatures in general not only look like fractions, but they also kind of work a little bit like fractions as well, in that we have a numerator at the top and a denominator at the bottom. That top number tells us how many beats there are in a bar, in a measure, and that bottom number tells us how long each beat is. So a 4/4 time signature, for example, means there are 4 beats per bar, 4 beats per measure, and each beat is a quarter note long. Or if you prefer the British terminology, each beat is a crotchet long. By and large, for the next few minutes, I'm just going to stick to the American terminology of quarter note and eighth note, just because that's a little bit more clearer and a little bit more logical in the context of time signatures. Now, things start off in a fairly standard way. We have 5 bars of 12/8 time. Okay, 12/8 is a perfectly common time signature, and on the face of it, decoding our time signature in the usual way, we can say it has 12 beats and each beat is an eighth note long. But 12/8 is also what we call a compound time signature, which means there is more than one way of counting it. Yes, we can count it as 12 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But we can also count it, and this is actually slightly more common, we can also count it as 4 beats, where each beat is made up of 3 underlying eighth notes, or of an underlying dotted quarter note, however you want to think about it. It works like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, and as you can see, the notes are beamed, the eighth notes are beamed to reflect that underlying 4 beat. Okay, so there are 4 groups of 3 eighth notes: 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's all pretty standard for the first 5 bars. We've got the slight complication of those tuplets in bars 2 and 3, but they're pretty straightforward. We'll come on to those shortly. Then things start to get interesting when we get to the long middle section of the piece, between the 2 repeat marks, starting in bar 6. Now, every single bar, every single measure in that section has, on the face of it, 16 eighth note beats. Yeah, and in fact you'll see that bars 10 and 11 are actually notated as 16/8. So here's the big question: why are all the other bars in that section notated either 12 plus 4 over 8 or 9 plus 7 over 8 when those upper numbers all just add up to 16? Why not just notate the whole thing as 16/8? The short answer is it's all to do with the stress patterns in the music. Let's look at bar 6, for example. I won't play the left-hand melody bit over the top, I'll just play the broken chords. Here we go, and I'll count it. I'll count eighth notes as we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now those eighth notes are mostly falling naturally in groups of 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's basically like a bar of 12/8 until we get to the last 4 eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah? Do you see how that stress pattern has slightly changed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah? So to capture that unusual uneven stress pattern, I've notated it as a bar of 12/8 plus 4 extra eighth notes. Yeah? So 12 plus 4, 8. And you'll see that I've beamed those eighth notes to reflect that stress pattern. The same sort of thing with a slight variation happens in those bars that are marked 9 plus 7 over 8. So for example in bar 7, again let's ignore the bit of melody over the top and just play the broken chords. Again I'll count them as eighth notes, but I'll count them with the split 9 and 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so our group of 4 is a little bit earlier than it was in the previous bar, and it's got a group of 3 after it. And I think that feels most natural as, in effect, a bar of 9/8, which again is a common time signature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we could count that in threes. 1, 2, 3, plus 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so with the 12 plus 4, 8, it's like 1, oops, hold on, bar 6 again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, a bar of 12, 8 plus 4 eighth notes, and number 9 plus 7, it's like a bar of 9, 8, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 7 eighth notes, okay? That might sound pretty confusing, but it is a good way of showing the underlying stress pattern. I could have notated it all as 16/8 and just used stress marks to show where the stress lies, but it's easier and more natural and more truly reflects what's going on in the music to do it like this, okay? If you're struggling with the counting, then the thing to do is to follow the way the notes are beamed. And remember, you've just got the start of a beat, of an overall compound beat, a little extra push at the start of every beamed group, okay? If you get really stuck, just flat out copy what I do. As I said, I'll play through the whole thing with my hands visible a little bit later in the tutorial. Next up, let's take a look at these little bits of melodic decoration that the left hand is playing over the top. They're barely melodies at all, they're just little fragments, okay, just to add a little bit of interest. Now, before we get stuck into the tuplet notation, all these brackets and numbers and such like, I just want to explain these little horizontal lines that we can see over the tops of the notes. These are what we call tenuto markings, and they can mean a variety of things in different contexts. The strict meaning of tenuto is that the note is held for its full length. Okay, the message is don't play around with the length of this note. However, it also kind of implies a little bit of extra stress or emphasis, and that's what's important here. I'm using the tenuto markings to say make sure these notes sound out clearly and confidently, yeah, because I think there's a risk that they might sound weak or lame and get kind of lost in the overall sound of the broken chords underneath them, yeah. So we're giving them a tiny little extra little bit of push. Playing them loudly particularly. If we didn't do that, then you know they might be a bit lost, and I just want them to have that little bit of emphasis. I've not marked them as tenuto throughout in the interests, as usual, of keeping the score as neat and tidy and clean as possible. That should, you know, keeping your score tidy should always be a really important consideration when you're scoring anything, okay? But I do want you to play those tenuto markings throughout. That's why I've put this marking under bar 8, hands and tenuto, sim throughout. Sim just stands for simile, an Italian term that's used in music to basically to mean keep doing it like this. So keep doing the tenuto, and also the hands, the hand over hand, you know, the crossing hands, I just haven't marked it after that point. Sometimes composers won't give you a simile marking. They'll just mark the first few examples of a phrase like that and expect you to work out that all the rest should be like that as well. But I've been kind and actually put in a note saying that you should do that. Now let's have a look at these tuplets, these funny little number and bracket markings that are appearing in several places in the score. The basic reason they are there is to make the score easier to read, especially in places where we've got funny little bits of timing going on, yeah? So they might look kind of complicated, and the theory underlying them might sound kind of complicated, but what they're doing is making the score easier to make sense of, as we'll see in a moment. Now, in musical jargon, a tuplet is basically a set of notes that have had their lengths altered so that they fit into a time they don't usually fit into. If there are just two of them, they're called a duplet, but after that they're named like bunches of siblings born at the same time, yeah? So triplets, quadruplets, quintuplets and all the rest. The most common sort of tuplet is the triplet. You probably know about triplets. A triplet is just 3 notes of equal length squashed into the time that would usually be taken up by 2 of those notes. So usually tuplets are about squashing, but sometimes they're about stretching, about making notes longer. And that often happens in situations where you have compound time like we do here. Remember what we said about 12/8 being countable in 4s as well as in 12s? That's compound time. Now in compound time, using a tuplet allows you to write notes as if they're in a corresponding simple time, like 2/4 or 4/4. Sounds kind of complicated. Let me show you what I mean. Let's look at bar 2. Here in bar 2, we're in 12/8 time, and let's count it in 4s. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you see how the notes I've put duplets on are scored like they're in 4/4 time? Each 8th note is half a beat, rather than being a third of a beat, which it would be in standard 12/8 time. Yeah, I could have scored them as dotted 8th notes, as dotted quavers, but using duplets there makes the timing clearer. The same sort of thing happens in bar 3, where we have this 1, 2, 3, 4. I could have scored that bar in 4/4, yeah, but just to save changing the time signature, I just continued the duplet from the earlier bar. Tuplets get really handy starting in bar 6. Okay, here's bar 6 again, just to remind ourselves, and let me just play it through. Okay, what I'm doing there is offsetting these upper notes, these little decorative notes here, against the broken chord. Yeah, they're coming in slightly in advance of the broken chord note that follows them, yeah, like this. They are not rhythmically aligned with the broken chord, yeah? Now, using a tuplet there, and specifically a quadruplet, means it's easy for me to represent that visually. You can see where those notes actually sit, rather than me having to use lots of complicated ties and semiquavers and stuff. By putting a quadruplet in there, I've essentially been able to drop in 2 beats of 4/4 time over 2 beats of the 12/8 time, yeah, and use the notation of 4/4 time to make things just a little bit more obvious about where things sit, yeah. I could easily have used an octuplet as well as a quadruplet, and if you saw the version of this score that I tweeted out a couple of weeks ago just before I published this video, then you'll see there that I did octuplets, but I decided to use a quadruplet instead. So in effect, we've got two quarter notes, 2 crotchets stretched out to fill what would be 3 quarter notes, 3 crotchets in 12/8 time. Okay, again, if that sounds really complicated, don't worry, because what's important is the tuplet is allowing us to see where the notes fall visually. One quick anomaly I should mention: tuplet brackets, when they're bracketed, are traditionally end after the final note of the tuplet, okay, which isn't necessarily the point at which that note comes off. So this bracket in bar 8 is effectively in force for 6 of the underlying 8th notes, okay. It looks like it ends after the 5th one, but it's for all 6, okay. Okay, so all of that sounds insanely difficult, but actually what these tuplets do is make your life easier, because it makes the alignment of the notes more obvious. So looking at bar 6, you can see that A flat there at the top comes in just slightly ahead of the E flat in the broken chord below it, and the G slightly ahead of the E flat in the broken chord below that. Let me just play that. Okay. I'm kind of ignoring the last 4 notes and treating that section as if it's a bar of 12/8, about a bar of standard compound time, yeah? So if in doubt, look at the alignment, look at where the notes fall. Don't try and count the tuplet, okay, that might your brain fall out, but look at where the notes lie relative to the broken chord notes underneath them. And don't worry about trying to time them perfectly, yeah? You've got kind of a get out of jail free card with this freely marking at the top, so they don't have to be exactly mathematically where they should be, as long as they're coming in kind of the right place. By the way, if you're wondering what these ties to nowhere are doing, yeah, like this one, they're just kind of a reminder that these notes are being sustained by the pedal longer than they actually last, because if we can, we're holding the pedal down throughout the piece. Again, I don't strictly speaking need them, it's more about the visual logic of the score. Yeah, I haven't even put one in every place that I could have put one in, yeah, but it's just a reminder that that note is carrying for, you know, on into infinity until it dies off. Okay, so we're nearly there. Now let's wrap up by talking about tempi, the speeds that we're playing at, and the pauses. Now, as with so many things in this piece of music, exactly how you interpret the instructions that I've given comes down to personal choice. So, for example, you might decide that brisk is a bit quicker than I play it, or a little bit slower. Okay, that's fine, it's entirely up to you. The reason composers give tempo directions using terms like that is that we don't want to be too prescriptive. Yeah, we want to give you a sense of the speed that you should be going at. Okay. Also, we want to give you an idea of the kind of feeling we want the music to have. Sometimes people say to me, and it tends to be tech heads and computer music nerds, hey Bill, why not just put a beats per minute marking at the top, 70 beats per minute or whatever, then it's nice and clear. But I'm not doing that, and the reasons for that are, first of all, I want to give you scope for interpretation, and secondly, because it's not just about the speed. You can see that kind of thinking at work when we come to bar 6, where we have this adagio marking. Now, adagio is one of the very few Italian terms I've used here, and it means something like slowly. So again, the tech heads say, well, why not just write slowly? The reason is, for a musician, adagio carries a bunch of other meanings as well as its kind of speed meaning, okay? And those meanings are associated with the level of expressivity, how freely the rhythm is played, and even with stuff like dynamics. So to most musicians, adagio usually implies a kind of broad, stately, expressive style of playing that tends to avoid extremes of loud and soft, and especially avoids real loudness. So again, using that term gives you the scope to put your own interpretation on the music and sends a message about what I think the style of the music should be. So basically, we stick with adagio all the way until the final 5 bars, when things get a little bit quicker again. Okay, and I've specified a little bit quicker than the introduction, though I'm not after exact mathematical exactitude here. If it's not that much quicker than the introduction, it doesn't matter. What I'm really trying to suggest is maybe a feeling of slightly greater intensity, of greater energy than we had in the first 5 bars. And then what about these pause marks? There are 2 different types that I use. Okay, the standard one, which is very common, the fermata, to use the Italian terms, that's the curved pause mark, and they usually represent a short pause, whereas square pause marks, which composers actually use much less often, okay, they're much less common, they are supposed to indicate a long pause. But again, it's up to you. Yeah, you're playing fairly freely anyway, so I'm just using these things to give you an overall sense of the expressive shape of the piece. Okay, the only really odd one is in bar 19, where we have 2 entirely empty bars, entirely empty measures, 1 in each stave, just with a single fermata over the top. Basically, that just means hold the sound as long as you feel necessary, because we've got all those notes being sustained by the sustain pedal, before hitting that final open cluster of notes. I won't call it a chord. Can you work out why I'm not calling it a chord? Answers in the comments. So hold the previous sustain until, as long as you like, until you just want to hit that cluster. And then, as the score says, hold the pedal until all the sound has faded. Okay, so now let's hear the piece again, but this time you can watch me play it as well, and I'll add some little annotations as I play, just to remind you of some of the stuff that we discussed. Okay, so that's it for this one. There'll be another easy but epic piano piece coming pretty soon. I really hope you have fun with this one. Remember, it's supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to make your life hard for a little while as you get past the challenges, but overall it's not a difficult piece to play, yeah? And if you give it some attention, you shouldn't have too much trouble with it. As usual, please follow me on social media if you don't already. Facebook, Twitter and Instagram links are all below. Subscribe to my channel. There's the big red button there, the subscribe button. Just hit that and it'll subscribe you to my channel for regular updates on what I'm doing. Check out my books, especially how to really play the piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you. If you want to learn about improvisation and that kind of thing, and you can read a little bit of sheet music, that will really help. And also please consider supporting my crowdfunding campaign on Patreon at patreon.com/Bill Hilton. And if you have any questions or comments, please stick them in the comment thread. If you want to record yourself or video yourself playing Hambleton Mosses, please do so and put it on YouTube. Literally nothing would delight me more. I would be really pleased if anyone did that, so give it a go by all means. Okay, there we go. I'll see you next time.